Hey guys, so I wanted to do a video on preparing for a track day, your first track day if you're a novice. Okay, so this video is really going to be dedicated to someone who is a novice. Now, the reason why I wanted to do this video is I've had a few questions on what to do when you're preparing for your first track day, um, and what are some of the things that you have to get ready for. So this is really going to be dedicated to someone who is a novice. So I've seen sometimes on forums and on Facebook pages where someone asks that particular question and they get flooded with information. And it's not to say the information that is provided is bad. It's just to say that sometimes people forget what is required for just being a novice. You don't need to, boil the oceans. You just need to be ready and prepared for your first track day. So that's what this video is going to be for. Now, the examples that I'm going to be providing and going over, I'm just going to use example of my 2006 dedicated track bike, my R1, and then my 2013 ZX10R dedicated track bike. So let's start with what is a bike? Someone asked me, what is a good bike for the racetrack? And I'm just going to say the bike you're most comfortable on. So if you're just going to use your own bike, you don't need to, like, as a first timer, go and buy a dedicated track bike. You could just get your bike that you have ready for the track. And for example, a friend of mine, he runs a naked bike, a speed triple, and he is wicked fast on that thing. Why? Because he's very comfortable. He doesn't like sport bikes. And when he had a sport bike, he wasn't very quick on it. So that's what he went with, speed triple, which is a street bike that he prepared for the track, and that's what he uses. For myself, I love my sport bikes. I'm good on my sport bikes. That's what I use. Now, what are some of the things you need to do to get ready? So let's start off with fairings, okay? Now, you don't necessarily have to go for your first track day and buy dedicated track plastics. So on the ZX10R, these are dedicated track plastics. On my 2006 Yamaha R1, these are OEM plastics, okay? Now, what are the differences? Well, basically, when you have dedicated track plastics, it's more ease of use. This is the belly pan, which is one piece, compared to my 2006 Yamaha R1, which is comprised of two pieces, including the rad guard, which makes three pieces. For example, for the tail has the upper lower, you have your solo seat, okay, the multiple pieces versus my 2013 ZX10, which is only comprised of one piece. And the reason for that is just quickness, ease of use to change things. If you need to service the bike, change your oil, that sort of thing. So if you want, you can get dedicated track plastics for your bike, but it's not a necessity for your first track day. Again, I'm thinking as a novice and thinking, the most basic needs for your first track day. So if you're going to use your OEM plastics, what's the next thing you need to do? Now, looking back at my 2006 R1, if we go in here, you can see there's no lights. And now I did this because this is a dedicated track bike. I removed the lights and I also fiberglassed in where the headlights are supposed to go. So these are just decals, okay? So you don't need to do that. All you need to do is you can leave your lights in. Some people do take it out just in case something happens. They don't want to have to replace, if you go down for whatever reason, you don't want to have to replace expensive parts. Some people actually remove their lights, but most people, I would say, just take some painter's tape, and what they do is you tape up your lights. That's a necessity at the racetrack. You wouldn't pass track safety rules to even get on the track unless you tape up anything that could shatter. So for example, you can see the residue here of painter's tape that I had on here. I removed my mirrors. I put on block-off plates. In most cases, you will remove your mirrors. You don't have to buy block-off plates. These are cheap. You could just put a screw in the washers there and you're fine. Okay, now, next thing. Let's talk about fluid. Okay, so if you want to go to the racetrack, the next thing you're going to need is, let's talk about our coolant. Coolant at the racetrack is a no-no. Most places don't normally check. When they do tech inspection, they'll ask you. And what you need to do, okay, to get your bike ready, they're going to ask you, do you have coolant or are you running water? So when you go to a racetrack, you're going to run water with this product right here. Okay. Those of you who don't know, you should know. This is water wetter. So you flush your coolant system, you run distilled water, not water out of your tap, not regular water from a bottle, distilled water. Sorry, I was looking for the distilled water, but you guys should know what that is, distilled water. Now, when you read the instructions on the water wetter, okay, it'll tell you to put a few ounces in there, and it actually helps keep the bike cool. Now, the reason why you want to change that is because glycol in the coolant is very slippery. And if you were to crash and then the coolant goes on the racetrack, you're going to piss a lot of people off. You're going to ruin their day, because then it has to be cleaned up and it takes time to clean that up. Versus when it's water, it usually just evaporates and you should be fine. Okay, so that's the whole purpose and the whole reason why you run water with the solution like water wetter to help even reduce the temps. Now, there are other alternatives to water wetter, but you have to read to see on the label. Usually it'll say if it's track applicable or something along those lines. Okay, so now we got that out of the way. That's a must. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Now, let's look at brake fluid. Okay, let's look at our brake fluid, and let's look here at our brake lines. Now, these are Goodrich brake lines. Okay, so they're a composite material. They're not your standard rubber hoses. Now, do you need to change your brake lines if you're a novice before doing your first track day? And no, you do not, but I'm just going to make mention of it. What you may need, okay, if you have a lot of experience, even though you're a novice and you might be a little quicker than most, or above average for your first track day, then what you're going to want is to upgrade your fluid. Okay. Now, it's not necessarily, let me just say that, hold on 1 second. So it may not necessarily be a requirement to change your brake fluid. For the most part, you're probably going to be fine with just running your stock fluid for your first track day as a novice, okay? But at some point, you are going to have to change it. So it's inexpensive to just change your brake fluid. So not a requirement, but I would say might as well go ahead and do it. Do you need to change your brake lines? The only reason why I say you want to change them, if you're going to change your fluid, you should probably change your brake lines at the same time to save a little bit of money on replacing the fluid. Otherwise, just change the fluid, run your stock brake lines, you're fine. So what we have here, this is normal brake fluid, okay? Liquid Moly is a really good brand. As you see there, it's a 5.1. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this is because if you're going to replace your brake fluid, this is really meant for the street. So you don't want this, okay? You're going to want something with a higher boiling point, which is this. Now, any brand that has a higher boiling point, usually it is a 5.1. But this is specific where it says this is race fluid versus that, which is good enough for the street. Now, if you look up close, if you look at the boiling points, okay, 260 degrees Celsius, which is 500 degrees Fahrenheit, versus what a brake fluid is, race fluid is, which is considerably higher. Now, the reason for that is what happens if you end up overheating and using a lot of your brakes. You'll boil your brake fluid, and then you're going to get brake fade, and then you're not really going to have good brakes. As a matter of fact, sometimes you just lose your brakes altogether. So for your first track day as a novice, is it a must? I would recommend just do it. Just change your fluid, because at that point you could still use that fluid is good enough for the street as well. It just has a higher boiling point and it's better fluids. Upgrade. Okay. Do you need something like this to update your rear sets? No, you don't. Okay. So if someone tells you otherwise, you do not. Do you need these little trinkets on the bike? Like a gas cap, a simple gas cap without the key, like updated vortex or whatever? No, you don't need that either. But I'll tell you what you're going to need now. Now this one is going to be, I want to call it controversial. It is a must, but this is also a preference thing. So let's look at tires. Tires is going to be the next thing. Next important thing that you're going to need for the racetrack. These are Dunlop GPA's race tire DOT. So it's a DOT race tire. Okay. Those are strictly track tires. They're race DOTs. Even though they have tread, they're strictly track tires. And they require tire warmers to be brought up to temp to use for the racetrack. Okay. Tire warmers for DOT race tires or full-on slicks is a must. No ifs, ands, or buts. So for your first track day, do you need a race tire? Do you need a slick? Do you need a DOT race? And no, you do not. But you do need a good tire. Can you use a street tire? Now this is where I said it might get a little controversial. So if we go to my street R1, my 2004 R1 that's just solely used on the street, this is a Dunlop Q4. Okay, this is a street tire, but I have used it on the track. It is, if you go to the website and you read manufacturer description on that bike, on those tires, they are basically a tire that you can use for the racetrack that don't need tire warmers. So they're actually a dual street track use tire. With today's technology, a lot of tires I think are like that. I think the Bridgestone S22 might be something similar to the Q4s. So if you want to save money because you don't want to start buying tire warmers, okay, so this is where it starts getting expensive. If you go with, like I said, you go with the DOT GPA tire, you need tire warmers. To power the tire warmers, you're gonna need a generator. So if you have a friend, or you have to buy your own generator, like, you know, you guys could share the costs on that, whatever, if he already has a generator. But this is why I'm saying, as a novice, do you need to go to that extent? Probably not for your first track day. Just need a good tire that is also rated for track use. Okay, so I've actually used a Q3 Plus on the racetrack, and I never had any issues with it. I didn't push it as far as I can, but I pushed it enough to know that, okay, I could still get some decent speeds in there. Tire held up really, really well. And if you have a Q3 on your bike and you want to run that tire or something equivalent, again, always go to the manufacturers and see what it says about that. You could go ahead and run that on the track. Two things though. First, I would say if you have a lot of mileage on the tire, then don't use it. Just to err on the side of caution. Pick up a new set if you can, whatever the case is, and then you can just go to track, ride, and then just take your bike home without issue. Tire pressure. So you have your cold temps and your hot temps. Again, very, very important. If you're doing, even as a novice, when you go to the manufacturer's site of your tire, read the recommendations of cold versus hot. So if your tire is a dual street track tire, it should have those specs. It should tell you your temperature cold. So when you get to the racetrack, what you do is you take your trusty tire gauge, measure your temperature, you set it to the recommendation, you do your session, do your laps, you come back in, check your tires again, see what the hot pressure is and see what the recommended hot pressure is at. So if let's just say, for example, it's 32 and you're at 35, well, take some air out. So you get to the recommended hot temperature. Okay, so if you're cold temp, that you do as soon as you get to the track, do your session, then check your hot temp. Trying to think what else now. Forks. Now this is where I would say as a novice you don't need this, but I'm going to mention it because some people may tell you otherwise. Forks and shocks. Now this is my 2004 R1. The forks on it are stock. The rear shock is stock. Here, for my 2006, the forks are stock, but the internals are Racetech. So I have Racetech springs in there. The rear shock is OEM, but it's an OEM from a 2008. Now you're asking me, well, why would I mention all this stuff? Well, here's the thing. As a novice, you probably don't need to worry about your forks or your shock, okay? The only reason why I upgraded it on on my 2006 is because I ran this bike for a few years and I got to the point where I was starting to outride the suspension. So from there, I needed to upgrade. Thing you should probably know is, depending on the year of bike you ride, newer bikes, like as my ZX10R, for example, forks on it are stock and they're wonderful. They probably don't even need to touch them. Don't need to do anything to them. No service, nothing. They should be adequate for the racetrack. Okay, it's going to be my first year running that bike. For my 06, like I said, I've been doing a lot of track with it, and I just got to the point where I couldn't adjust it anymore, the suspension anymore, to where it suited my needs. So that's the other thing. When you get to the racetrack, you're gonna have to play around with your settings. If there's anyone at the racetrack for your first day that knows about setting sag, it's called setting your sag, talk to them. They'll help you set up your OEM stuff. Okay, and then you're gonna have to go and try and check your rebound, check compression and stuff like that, and see where you become comfortable. You don't need to boil the oceans. You don't need Öhlins, forks, front, rear, all that other stuff. Not right away. You don't need to do anything. You don't even need to even change your springs like I did. I only did this after the fact, when I knew I had to. As a novice, you should be able to go in, set it up. You do need to set up the bike. Okay, set up your suspension. And once it's set, you ride it until you start getting comfortable. And at some point, you're gonna know, and sometimes it usually takes years. We're not talking like a couple of track days, where you're at the point where you outride your suspension. Then I would say go ahead and upgrade it. Otherwise, you don't need to. And newer bikes, you probably don't need to do anything. Some of you guys who run R1Ms, for example, or anything equivalent, those things, you turnkey, you're on the track, you are pretty much fine. So that's all the info I got for right now. Oh, one last thing. Sorry. Brake pads. Okay. You want to find a brake pad that is not overly aggressive. Again, as a novice, I'm going to err on the side of caution. As a novice, you could probably get away with your OEM pads, brake pads. Okay, but as you start getting better and getting faster, you're going to need to change that. You're going to need to upgrade to a different pad. Now, if your bike is dual purpose, so where you're going to, just prep it for the racetrack and then you're going to ride it on the street, I would say don't go with a full type of race pad. You don't need it. Because the problem with full race pads is they take time to heat up to work properly. They require heat. And you're just not going to get that heat on the street for the most part. So you need to get something that is street and track use. So again, you go to, whether EBC or whatever manufacturer, you go to their website and figure out what pad is going to be sufficient for you. Usually I think it's an HHH sintered. I forgot which ones I have. I'll give the example, but the ones that I have are not overly aggressive, but they work wonderfully. Just really, really awesome. So that is it for now. I'm going to do another video on what's under this cover, which is an absolute monster. And I'm going to compare it to the RC51, sound-wise anyway. You guys are going to love that. And I want to do a little showcase on this thing when I got time. This is really a fun bike. I love this bike. It's been my trusted steed for the last 12 years, I think. So I had it since 06. And anyhow, that'll be for another video. So guys, that's it for now. I hope you got some use out of this. Listen to me talk, whatever. If you have questions, throw them up. And, you know, good luck. Safe riding.